tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa.
Namo 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 tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Homage to the blessed, noble, and perfectly enlightened one. Namo Saranto Sukhe Doye Alahari Samya Sambuddhase. Namo Saranto Sukhe Doye Alahari Samya Sambuddhase. Namo Saranto Sukhe Doye Alahari Samya Sambuddhase. 无上甚深微妙法，百千万劫难遭遇。我今见闻得受持，愿解如来真实义。Yet surpassed deep, profound, subtle, wonderful Dharma, in 100,000 million aeons is difficult to encounter. Now I come to receive and hold it within my sight and hearing. I vow to find the thus come once true non-communion. Namo Da Fang Guang Po Hua Yin Jing, Hua Yin Highway Po Pu Sa. Namo Da Fang Guang Po Hua Yin Jing, Hua Yin Highway Po Pu Sa. Namo Da Fang Guang Po Hua Yin Jing, Hua Yin Highway Po Pu Sa. So did you get to the Dao Fei Dao Zhi? Did you finish that? You did the first 7? Equality, knowledge, and perspectives. You did that one already? Way and not the way is the last one you finished, right? Okay. So, starting with Xiuxing, right? Zhijin? Or are you starting Pingdong, Qingjing Xin? Xiuxing. Okay. So let's read the Chinese slowly, or the pinyin slowly. until the end of the first section here. Pingdang qingjing xin, xiuxing zhijian pingdang qingjing xin, yu yi che puti fan fa, shang shan guan cha pingdang qingjing xin, jiao hua yi che zhong sheng pingdang qingjing xin, pu sa moha sa, yi che shi zhong pingdang qingjing xin, de ru puti. Okay. So not knowing what's been done before in terms of the lectures, did Dharma Master Sure lecture last week? Okay. What did he emphasize? What was he stressing? Difficulty? Purity? Equality? Precepts? A little louder. Regrets and doubts, okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's just take it apart a little. My approach might be a little different. Different things jump out at me than, say, jump out at somebody else. And different things will jump out at you from the text as you read it. And if you read it next week, another set of things might jump out at you as well. So this is not a fixed teaching, but rather it's a kind of a template. And the more you go into it, the different ways you look at it, different things reveal themselves. So I'm going to do a couple things tonight. And if there's time, I'm going to do a Jataka story as well, just because I love the Jataka stories. And from everything I understand, stories are probably a better way to learn than lecturing. People remember stories, they forget lectures. So I found a really wonderful Jataka that I haven't read in years. It seems to fit the text tonight. So I'll end with a Jataka story, and then you can all have pleasant dreams, pleasant Dharma dreams. So we're into the fifth of the 10 grounds. Difficult conquest, this is called. What is difficult to conquest? What is difficult to conquer? This is the question. Any discussion on this so far you've had? Ah, good. And then it says that the Bodhisattva, well, this is, who's speaking now? Who's the interlocutor? Vajra Treasury Bodhisattva. So is this a sutra or not a sutra? Ah, it's a sutra, but the Buddha's not speaking, right? Ah, so who can speak, who can lecture, who can talk, who can discourse, and it still be considered a sutra? Only the Buddha? No. Huh? If you ask them to? If the Buddha asks somebody to, right? But what if the Buddha doesn't ask them to? Okay. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting discussion. The word of the Buddha, Buddha Vacha, is considered to be in the sutras, in the Vinaya, and in the commentaries. Okay, so the three baskets basically consider the word of the Buddha, but the Buddha didn't speak, didn't lecture all of these. Different people at different times spoke different sections, right? So if you have a sutra starting, Rushurable one, thus I have heard, that's not the Buddha, right? That's someone else telling what they heard. So you can have bodhisattvas, you can have devas, right? Anybody else that you know has lectured in a text that's still considered to be the word of the Buddha?
right? You can even have what's called Huashan, whatever Huashan means. These are transformation beings. Beings that appear only for the purpose of delivering a discourse and don't appear in the form that they really are. So there's no translation for what these are. You can have devas speaking it. So basically the Buddha laid down a criteria where he said that which is conducive to samadhi, liberation, wisdom, kindness, compassion, so forth, that which is conducive to what is kusala, wholesome and healthy, and so on and so forth. This is the word of the Buddha. And that which is not the word of the Buddha. So we do not have to be limiting ourselves to the fact that a bodhisattva, Vajracharya bodhisattva, is discoursing here. Okay, so that's just, some people get a little confused and say, well, it's only the Buddha. And in fact, the problem is, what's the problem with that? We don't know. The Buddha didn't write anything. So the problem is, or the challenge is, all that we have has been handed down as what the Buddha was purported to have said on different occasions, different situations. So to say that we only authenticate that which the Buddha directly spoke, we have no way of knowing that because there was no recordings and the Buddha wrote nothing. So we have to go by some other criteria. I'm not going to go into great detail tonight, but it's not a big problem, okay? So here, there's 10 listings of a state of mind or a mind or a quality of mind that are defined as equality and purity. This is the refrain that appears again and again: equality and purity towards or from or in or regards to. So, and then there's something difficult to conquer, difficult to conquest. So it seems as if what's being talked about here is the bodhisattva's own mind, or the cultivator's own mind. And there is a level of difficulty of overcoming something in order to get further along in this path of purity. Remember, one of the refrains are, as pure gold is put again and again in the fire, someone going through the 10 grounds progressively becomes more pure. So this is the fifth, the intermediate of 10 phases. And what's difficult to conquer here? If you look at the 10, what do you see? We have to remember that in almost all these cases, the path of realization, or the ground of cultivation, is the cultivator of the bodhisattva's own mind and being. So what is difficult to conquest is not others or externals, but one's own processes. And you get progressively stronger and purer and more confident as you go along. What is it? The Sutra in 42 sections has a saying, difficult to conquer others, most difficult to conquer oneself. So this is probably referring to the self-mastery of self-cultivation. And at a subtle level, since this is also someone who's on the 10 grounds of bodhisattva, this is a very high stage of self-cultivation. They're already enlightened beings or enlightening beings. And yet, they are progressively working at the most subtle things to get pure. Now, if we say then the difficulty, and this helps us, is the self-cultivation, is the inner process, then we'll get more out of this instead of seeing it as something a bodhisattva does in terms of some external high rarefied environment. I have a little trouble, I'll go into purity and equality and maybe some ways to approach it, but I have a little trouble with mindset. But I'm not sure, so I don't want to step on anybody's translation toes, but I'll raise my resistance to it a little bit, or my understanding of it and why I wouldn't use it. It says 10 kinds of mindsets. Now, mindset, to my understanding, is a word, it's an English phrase that came up in the use of general systems theory. You know, it's part of the vernacular of general systems theory, and it refers to a set of assumptions or ideas or views, points of view, that is either held by one or a group of people, but usually a group of people, and that once it's so established, it creates a really powerful incentive within that individual or the groups to accept prior beliefs, prior assumptions, prior choices. And sometimes it's used interchangeably then with groupthink. Have you ever heard the word groupthink? Groupthink means the orientation or paradigm, it's another word that's used with, of a group or an individual that's set in a certain way and then receives information through that set of mind, set meaning the setting, the holding of the mind to this, and also projects out through that. And by definition, it's very difficult to counteract. It has what they call an inertia to it. So a mindset is a kind of attitude or a fixed idea or assumptions that works in a certain way and has its own momentum and is very hard to reverse and change. It becomes almost leaning towards ideology. It's very comparable to a word that we used to use when we were training in history to describe how a group of people or a culture at a particular time looks at and orients themselves towards the nature of an individual, the society, and the larger nature, and it's called Weltanschauung. Anybody familiar with that phrase? Right, what does Weltanschauung mean? Excuse my German. Right, literally view of the world, world view. But it refers to, a Weltanschauung is something that's determined or conditioned by culture, by historicity, by your social values. And so the Chinese could have a Weltanschauung, and Americans could have a Weltanschauung. Okay, let's see, who else? The Dutch could have a Weltanschauung. British have a Weltanschauung. And not all Weltanschauungs, not all worldviews correspond. They can be very different. So mindset for me then raises this problem of, do bodhisattvas have mindsets? And I would lean towards saying I don't think they do, because a mindset is something that is rather rigid and attached and projecting a view onto something else. It's a perspective. But the mind of Bodhi is not a perspective. It's the opposite of that. It has no perspective. It has no place. That's producing, the mind that dwells nowhere, that attaches to nothing. This is the mind of Bodhi. So it doesn't have a perspective. It just sees things in a responsive way as they really are. It's nimble, alert, flexible, but it is always reflecting the true nature of reality. To be enlightened is not to have a perspective. I always have trouble with the expression, a Buddhist perspective. Because by definition, the Buddha doesn't have a perspective. He doesn't have a view. So this is very important. It can be very misleading, because then it suggests that bodhisattvas engage in a kind of willful, mindful projection of a certain set of assumptions and values onto reality, which really isn't the nature of Bodhi at all. So I know it's difficult to translate these things. I'm not proposing there's an easy translation. But the mind, by the very nature in Buddhism, the unattached, unbound, liberated mind, which is the mind of the Avatamsaka, puts forth a vision of the mind that is, in fact, nowhere dwelling, nowhere attached, clinging to nothing. Not to a view of self, not to dharmas, not to the past, present, or future, not to time or space. All time is one time, all place is one place, and there's no perspectives, because perspectives means a narrowing of consciousness to an angle, whereas the Bodhi mind has no narrowing of consciousness. It's the expansion of the mind to 360 degree, if you want to use even that measure, of full awareness and perception without the slightest bit of perspective, view, or attachment to thought. I hope I didn't step on any. Yes. Excuse me? Well, I think you're close to something. If you use the word nature or natural as it's used in text, referring to the essential nature, zixing, the nature, and this nature is really human nature, okay? But this nature is the repository of the myriad phenomena. This nature is the nature that gives rise to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and also the hells and the animals and so forth. So this is the Dharma realm mind, the Dharmakaya, if you will. That mind is the mind that the Bodhisattva is cultivating at this point. And that mind, even at this fifth stage, is still refining the little bits of impediments and obstructions that could keep that from fully functioning, unattached, unbounded, liberated. So at a very, very fine level, there's a rubbing and polishing of this capacity, this natural mind, the Buddha mind, the awakened mind. That's what's going on here. So, ironically, he or she is using that quality of the mind, purified through these practices, to liberate that mind as well. It's like the knife sort of sharpening itself. Well, we have to stick with it with text. We'd have to stay with the mind, but it is the Banxing, it's the original mind, it's the Buddha mind. It is the mind that all living beings equally share, and when realized, is full awakening, and when it's unrealized, it's in various states of ignorance and clinging and grasping, and it's an ordinary mind. But it's one substance functioning differently. So the Bodhisattva is not moving towards a mindset of a Bodhisattva, which would indicate a fixed position of viewing, but is actually working towards an unencumbered, totally awakened use or function of the mind called Buddha or a Bodhi. Anybody else on that? You had a question about that, or you were? Mm-hmm.
Lion heart
Mm-hmm.
to describe someone's general spirit. And so like a pure and tranquil heart towards the Dharma of the Buddhas of the past.
Okay, and so the reason why xin it becomes difficult to translate is because it has such a rich and integrated meaning in the Chinese, and we don't have a ready equivalent for that. So often translators go heart-mind, the heart mind, as a way of trying to get both concepts. But you could put heart, mind, will, emotions, and body, because it includes all of those. So if you look at the Buddhist rendering of the mind, as the 18 realms, it includes the sense objects, the sense organs, and the six consciousnesses. This is all the functioning of the mind. So it's not inside, it's not outside, it's interactive, it's dynamic. It's not a thing or an entity, it's some wonderful functioning of a capacity that, to go back to your thing, is considered to be part of our nature. And so this mind expresses it. If you look at when Master Hua did the 10 Dharma realms are not beyond a single thought, he starts with Xin, the character mind. He says 3 dots and a hook like a crescent moon. All Buddhas come from it and all demons do too. So he's expressing this universal capacity we call the mind or the nature that functioning in different ways produces the 10 Dharma realms, back and forth and flowing and whatnot, but still in a dynamic, and it's all the same mind, and it includes will, emotions, thoughts, feelings, impulses, responses. It's a rich concept. It's the total functioning of the whole mind-body continuum in relation to the whole world. So mindset doesn't quite... Mindset is a particular narrowing down of consciousness to either a group or a cultural or an ego perspective that then you use to carve your way through things. But it projects onto rather than reflects. So it's a projecting function of the mind. It's a very limited use of the mind. And you can see how the very definition of it being difficult to change once it's set in that way, once it becomes attached. The one that they used was a mindset was mutual, what was it called? Mutual, oh God, this was during the Cold War. Mutually assured destruction. Okay? Acronym? MAD. And mutually assured destruction was a mindset that the United States Defense Department had at that time. Anybody know what this is? Do you know? Go ahead and guess what mutually assured destruction is. Well, that's kind of... Right. So the idea was, if we have enough nuclear weapons, and somebody else has nuclear weapons, if we keep them a little bit ahead or equal, if we keep it, they make one, we make one, they make one, we make one, the meaning being, if they attack us, our system will counterattack immediately while it's being attacked, and both will be mutually assured of destruction. So that would deter either from setting it off, because you would not set it off knowing that if you set it off, you could be destroyed. And so they became a kind of weird detente, and therefore preventative of nuclear war. So it was like, let me help understand this. By making more weapons, we actually ensure that we won't use them. Well, this became, sorry. Right. And someone I remember at the time said, and remember, we could all be cremated equal. And so there was a kind of equality to this madness. But this is called a mindset. This was a prime example of what a mindset is. This kind of thinking then leads to these kinds, based on these kind of assumptions. And you might question, is this how a bodhisattva would organize reality with a mindset that had almost preordained outcomes because it was so rigidly directive from this set of assumptions and priori patterns of behavior and so forth. So that's why I don't think mindset here will quite capture, if nothing else, just because of the connotation it carries.
This particular passage, because here they actually is pointing to, I would say, rather wholesome qualities of equality and purity, not mutual assured destruction or madness. So I was wondering, what word would you use? Tomas mentioned heart. Mm-hmm. Do you think that would work, or
well,
do you think just mind works?
Maybe all we can do tonight is come up with some things that it seems to be. So you're in your effort to translate, you're saying, well, it's positive, it's a wholesome disposition, it could be a heart, it could be an attitude, an orientation, but I would call it almost something like an awakened orientation or disposition, a leaning, a wholesome leaning. A mind also means intention. It means the way in which you are moving towards. It's the directional. Instead of seeing it as an abstract passive thing, see it as thinking. His or her thinking sets itself on, or is aiming towards. Instead of saying a mindset or a mind that, his thinking or her thinking, her intellectual, emotional movement, the direction of their being and thought and everything, that's what I would go for here. Make it more active and passive. It's how the bodhisattva uses the mind-heart. And it's the using of the they move their minds greater and greater into this equality, purity of blah, blah, blah. So it's an actual verb rather than an adjective. And then it's like, how are they? What is their nature of thought and feeling and emotion? It is in a kind of movement or dynamism towards these things. So the orientation of their thinking, their feelings, their emotions, their intentions, their vows, all of this makes up the functions of the mind. This functioning is moving towards. So I think we have to get away from abstract and move it, because this is dynamic, this is cultivation. So for want of a better word, I'm just not going to translate it, but just say mindset. And just let's use mind with the idea that it's inadequate, but at least we haven't limited it to a set. It still has a full encompassing. And that's where you have trouble with the one that says a mindset of equality and purity towards the mind. That was before, that's what you did last week. So it's almost like a way of thinking and feeling and emoting and so forth that's moving towards the mind itself. In other words, the enlightened mind. So your attitude, your orientation has an equality and purity about it towards the very nature of that Bodhi mind, the Buddha mind, Fo Xin, Ban Xin, Zi Xing, Xin, that mind, your own orientation now towards that. There's a little bit of a gap between where you are right now and where you hope to arrive. So then what do we do with, we worked with that a little bit. What about equality and purity? What's that referring to? This appears again and again, right? Pingdeng, Qingjing. What do you make of those two words? That would be what? Equality and, okay. Well, let's look at it a little bit. We've got, first of all, there's three things happening. Time itself, past, present, and future, is equalized and purified somehow. Let's just say that. Okay, so that's the first thing. Anything, in other words, the Dharma and the Buddhas and all this are not conditioned by time. So to be pure and equal means you are not filtering it, you are not adding to it, you are not conditioning it by any way. So purity and equality means there's nothing there of your own. You're not adding your own views. Pure means not adulterated. It's clear, it's translucent. You see things as they really are. To be pure means to have no filters, no impediments, no contaminants. Naturally, the contaminant of purity would be greed, anger, and stupidity. So all those negative emotions, the klesha, the afflictions, the phanau, to be pure means they are not in the mix anymore. And so your purity is you see the Buddha Dharma and you see time itself as not conditioned by anything. It's just there. It's the eternally dwelling, if you want to use that language that we use, and the triple jewel. So again, your mind is free from conditioning. It's seen as, oh, it's Chinese Buddhism. Or now it's an American Buddhism. Or the Buddhism of the past was a lot better than the Buddhism of the present, and the Buddhism of the future is going to be, depending on your worse or better, blah, blah, blah. You don't have that filter. So the purity means it's not adulterated, there's no admixture. You are absolutely crystal clear. What you see is what's really there. There's no admixture. That's a different way of looking at purity rather than a moral sense. I'm right and good and wholesome. You're looking at purity as being unalloyed. And again, you have the analogy of pure gold here. There's no admixture. So when you have a mind that is pure, it means it's not mediating between your thoughts, desires, fears, ambitions, and so forth, and the nature of the Dharma, right? So that's one way to look at purity. And equality? What's the equality then? Because this has two meanings, remember. Pingdong means equal, but it also means what? Cool. You be cool. Equanimity. It has this idea of unflappable, undisturbable. So it has, because everything is equal, not high or low, you can therefore have an attitude of sameness. The Bodhisattva enters the level equality, the samadhi of the level equality of all dharmas. It's one of the liberating samadhis in the earlier part of the Avatamsaka. The Bodhisattva enters the samadhi of the level equality of all dharmas. In other words, you see all phenomena as one and the same. They are, in fact, just conditioned dharmas, dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, dewdrops, lightning, flash. Contemplate them thus. When you see everything like that, not only all dharmas, but all people, of course yourself not included, because you're a special dharma. You're outside those conditioned dharmas. Everything's conditioned, dreams, illusion, bubble, shadows, except me. No, you actually see, sorry, someone was enjoying this. No, you actually see all dharmas, all phenomena, all the myriad fa, small d, and you see this dharma, the self, as a conditioned thing. When you get to that state, everything becomes a level, even plane. Nothing's more delightful and less delightful. There's nothing to attain. Everything's just as it is. There's nothing to get, nothing to lose. You relax. With that comes the equanimity. So equality means because you see the nature of reality as it truly is, all that craving and aversion, everything just gets quiet. Gets quiet. You are happy just being content in that space of wanting nothing, seeking nothing. At the place of seeking nothing, no worries. Oh, then you have a calm contentment or equanimity, pingdong. Unflappable. You don't rise, you don't fall. It's not like, wow, I came to the monastery tonight, I really want to cultivate, and tomorrow you're going to go out and get wasted. And then you come back 2 weeks later, and blah, 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 up and down like this. It's not like that at all. Someone praises you, you go, wow, yeah, gee, that's great. You get an A+ in your paper, it's like I'm in heaven. And somebody says, rewrite the whole thing, you're in hell, right? Or they say, you're really ugly, or you're fat. All your brothers and sisters are smarter than you. What happened? Did you drop on your head when you were a kid? And then you go to the hells, and they say, among all the kids in the class, you're probably the most bright. Stanford and Harvard's too good for it. Not good enough for you. Blah, blah, blah. Then you go up, then you go down, right? This is not pingdangshin. Nothing to lose, nothing to gain. This is that level equality. So again, if you see equality, at one level, you see all dharmas as level and equal. But most importantly, equality is also means towards other living beings. So it has two meanings in the text. Okay? One meaning is when you have this equality mind towards all phenomena and all things, you see their sameness. And this is like the poem, what is it, the Old Fool? You know the poem, The Old Fool? The old fool wears tattered robes to keep out the cold. Doesn't think of fancy clothes or whatnot. Don't you know the verse of the old fool? Maitreya's patience. Slandered, he just spit in his face, he lays down to sleep, he saves his energy and gives you no fun now. That idea, that's the level of equality. Example, once we were out and 2 cars came up to visit us when we were out on the highway. and one was a brand new gray Mercedes that this laywoman was driving, and the other one was the old beat-up gray Chevrolet that barely ran with rust spots and all over it. And so the monks and nuns came up in the, which one? Chevrolet, very good. And of course the laywoman wanted to bring the master in the Mercedes. So she insisted the master ride in the Mercedes. And he just went along with it. So he came out, visited the whole thing. We had a little lunch together, everything's done. And the master got up to go, and he started walking towards the gray Chevrolet. And the laywoman said, no, no, master, this car, this is the good car. You should ride in that. And he said, my, what a dumb teacher you have. You can't even tell the difference between a good and a mediocre car. And he just smiled. And she got it. She got it. What a dumb teacher. You can't discriminate. But what he was talking about was this quality that does not see good or bad in things like that, or in necessarily people. So equality towards people is, if they're bad, you just see it as their bodhi nature afflicted in some way. And if they're good, you enjoy that, but you don't praise the good and slander the bad, or accept the good and push the bad away. This equality means all beings I see as potential Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. These are my brothers and sisters in the Dharma. I don't have this attitude of discrimination or slighting or slandering. I don't love them, nor do I hate them. I just see them with pingdangshin, a level and equal mind. These are living beings like myself, striving to be the best they can, striving to become awakened and whatnot. As Albert Schweitzer said when he went into his practice, was his medicine in the jungles of Africa. Do you know about Albert Schweitzer? Very gifted German doctor, most notable for his accomplishments with the organ playing Bach. But once he discovered that a great deal of the world did not have not only anything close to medical care that was in Germany, but even so substandard that people were dying 40 and 50 years before they should have, just because they didn't have an injection or an antibiotic or something. So he set up his clinic in Africa. And his insight was, I am life that wills to live. I am life that wants to live in the midst of life that wills to live. Therefore, I should honor and respect that universal will to live and support and nurture it. That was his inspiration at 15 or 16 that led him on to this career as a doctor. But it's the level equality again. And he would say, even the littlest mosquito wills to live. You try to strike at it, it will fly away. This will to live is what defines us all, regardless of gender or caste or class or country. Therefore, I will, as a doctor, universally nurture that wherever I can. Ring a bell? Let me read you. A disciple of the Buddha should maintain a mind of kindness. Where's this from? Could be from any place so far, right? It's a little contest here. Who's going to guess where this is from first? I'm not telling you where the passage is. I didn't make this up. Okay? A disciple of the Buddha should maintain a mind of kindness. Warm? He's a Buddhist, so you're warm. Huh? Parable of? Okay. No? Oh, well, the prize tonight was a free dinner at the exquisite vegetarian restaurant. But now we're down to the second prize, which is vegan candy. Okay, disciple of the Buddha should maintain a mind of kindness. Now I'm going to give you, and cultivate the practice or the conduct of liberating beings. Warren? Still you don't get the candy. Anybody else? I'm surprised. And I'm surprised because some people here have just gone through this. One should reflect thus. All male beings have been my father. All female beings my mother. Bodhisattva precepts. The Brahmanat Sutra. Okay. All beings have been my father. All beings have been my mother. All female beings. throughout my previous lives, there's not a single being who has not given birth to me. Hence, all beings of the six paths are my parents. Hells, animals, ghosts, devas, asuras, and people. All these beings have been, are, or will be my parents. Therefore, if someone kills and eats any of these beings, he or she thereby slaughters my parents. Moreover, he or she kills a body that was once my own. Now we're getting into a little deeper here. For, anybody know the next line? Memorized, memorized, memorized? We don't do that anymore. Just Google it. Okay. For all elemental earth, water, have previously served as a part of my body. Now he's taking the four elements and saying, not only were these previous beings my parents, but in fact, the whole of nature of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, that has been part of my body, and all fire and air have composed my basic substance. As I am made up of these four substances, all of nature is made up of this, to the ends of empty space. Therefore, I shall always cultivate the behavior of liberating beings, and in every life be reborn in the eternally abiding Dharma, which is what the Bodhisattva is doing. The joy of discovering the Dharma. Remember the delight, the passages that before this, how delightful they were? If you go back and said, they're all just jumping up and down. The heavenly maidens are filled with happiness. They gaze in veneration. Boy, we just found the Dharma. That's called being reborn in the eternally dwelling Dharma, their home. They teach other living beings to liberate as well. This is from the Brahmanet Sutra. So the Bodhisattva vow is the level equality vow here. It's saying, all beings have been, will be, or are my parents, my teachers, my sisters and brothers, and all earth, fire, air, and water has been, is, or will be sustaining me. So in this mix of matter and energy ad infinitum, I locate myself. Hence in another passage, Avatamsaka says, at a point of awakening, not a mindset, but a point of awakening, in other words, the mind is free of all setting, sees things that really are, he or she sees there's no difference between himself, herself, and all worlds. This is a stage of awakening the Bodhisattva sees that there's no difference between himself and herself and all worlds, and all beings, and all phenomena. It's pretty profound. So, equality can mean not only towards things, but it also means this attitude towards people. And thus, because you are this way, you are therefore unflappable. You are unflappable. What does unflappable mean? Unperturbable. You cannot be upset. You cannot be thrown off. You're steady. You're constant. Everything's okay. No problem. This is difficult. Hence, the passage here is talking about difficult conquest, because you have to overcome all that keeps you from that. And what would that be? Well, that living being belongs to me. That living being is going to make me happy. That's a pretty living being. I want that living being. That living being, I'm just using living being instead of girl and boy, but it's just expanded, right? Pretty girl, want pretty girl. Not pretty girl, don't want pretty girl. Was pretty girl, not pretty girl, divorce, get another pretty girl. Vice versa, just reverse the gender. Pretty thing, got that pretty thing? Nice pretty thing. Oh, prettier thing, not so pretty thing anymore. Bomb, 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 bomb. That's not unflappable. That's just going up and down and up and down. So how do you get there? You actually have to see through this stuff. All your projections of want and don't want, like and dislike, is just your mad mind grasping at things, making them into things, objects of your desire, and then getting tired of them, picking up new objects of desire. That's what you have to get through. Not so easy. Okay? And the equality part means you just don't have these attitudes towards people. That's pretty tough. It's easy to hang out with people that are copacetic, who flatter and fawn and make us feel good. But to hang out with people that rub us the wrong way, we naturally avoid this until we can't avoid it and then it's hell. We get stuck in a car with them, on a bus with them, in a country with them. Let's see, what are these called? Oh, the sufferings. Oh, the 8 sufferings. Being apart from those you like and being close to those you hate. That is no longer the level equality. That's called dukkha. So dukkha is rooted in not having the pingdong qingjing xin. You see where this is going? So at this stage, we have to imagine ourselves to say, well, that's the bodhisattva. How do I begin to get to that point? So when there's upset, when there's passion, I got it, you should probably know it's a pretty good sign that you've left that. Now you say, well, if I'm upset, I know I left that and I'll return to my passion. No, because passion will leave you too. So you're still not in the, it's not like you grab all the passion and gusto you can get and avoid all the discomfort, and then that's the pingdong xin. Because that passion and gusto also has, as a conditioned dharma, will pass away as well. And so you go up, you go down. You go up, you go down. Baby's born, we celebrate. Parents die, we cry. We get a good health report, we celebrate. Looks like that's a tumor, we cry. Name it. Name anything that's, and there we have that volatile, flappable mind. And this mind, this moving mind, is called the mind of not bodhi. And that's what it means. When that mad mind, that man grasping, rejecting mind, can be stilled, that very stilling of it is bodhi. So now you see, I can see all of you going, oh, that's why it's called difficult conquest. Because the bodhisattva now has gotten through the thing you did last week, views, doubts, and regrets. That's gone through. Knowing what is the way and not the way, clarity of seeing that. Mind, equality, purity, color, knowledge and views he sees as just conditioned things. There's just different ways, different perspectives. I do not cling to that. It's called not having the impediment of what is known and viewed. It's an actual term in Buddhism. Not having the impediment of what is known and viewed. You're not sticking and attaching to your view. Yes, there's hands going up. No. You cultivate them in the sense that you understand them. You know them. You know what perspectives and views everybody's coming with. This is part of the bodhisattvas. Remember it says the gathering in dharmas? You know living beings because you cultivate and you know those knowledge and perspectives. Even studying, for example, a university curriculum is a way of cultivating knowledge and perspectives. But you yourself maintain towards them a purity and equality. You see how they in fact become mindsets. And you understand them and you can teach and transform from within them, but at the same time towards them you are pure and equal. You don't prefer one or the other and say, oh, the Marxian perspective is much better than the feminist perspective, or the right-wing Tea Party perspective, or the liberal progressive perspective. These are just knowledge and views. These are different ways that people organize according to an attachment and a perception. And you understand and you can cultivate these. You cultivate them in the sense that you know what they are and understand them. But at no point do you attach and cling to them or set up with them. And this gets into the Bodhi shares, Bodhi share dharmas that we'll go into hopefully tonight. And then you see the next one? That's the mindset in teaching each and every living being. So all of these are precursors to the ability to teach each and every living being. If you don't understand their perspectives, you don't understand their views and doubts and regrets in your own and so forth, how can you teach and liberate others as you teach and liberate yourself? So this is an increasing purity and equality that you cultivate within yourself that just naturally spills over towards your attitude and treatment of others. In fact, you cannot do it with each and every other living being unless and until you're doing it or have done it within yourself. This is very, very interesting. So there's no teaching without having been self-taught and transformed. This is what the sixth patriarch means when he says you take across the living beings of your own nature. Then let's talk about taking over other living beings. So this equality and purification the Bodhisattva is doing, but always with the mind of teaching each and every living being. And with that, they entered then the fifth ground. So we're just sort of scratching the bit of the surface here. But you'll see, if you look at, that's why in translation, always look at the context, look at the bigger context, then come down to the specifics. So you have difficulty, that's your first cue. And then you have equality and purity, right? And if you pull these all together, you have, again, a difficult process of self-cultivation that is both purifying, getting rid of admixtures, and leveling out so that there's no grasping, attaching, rejecting, and so forth in yourself and in the most subtle of ways. And even knowing what is the way and not the way requires that kind of clarity. Now let's look, if any other questions, otherwise we'll go to the Bodhi shares because they're kind of interesting. Yes? Meaning? Because the Dharma wears out. You know, right. So I'm joking. I'm joking that the Dharma wears out. It's not like batteries like this thing. You know, I got with two fresh, batteries, and the Dharma was good, and it started to wear out, and it's like I couldn't hear it anymore, or a tape that's breaking up. Well, in fact, that is indeed. I mean, now you're at the heart of it. The very question you're asking is where this text is going. So I don't know if you asked the question because you're getting a vibe intuitively from the text, but the correspondence. The very question you're asking is at the heart. How do you conquer that? How do you get a hold of that? How do you overcome this back and forth, up and down energy? That's what this is really talking about. And the reason I'm going to do the Jataka tonight, because it's a perfect illustration of that. But let's look at the what are called here the Bodhi Share Dharmas. What's the Chinese for that? Yeah. So now these are there's something called 37. 37 what? Anybody know the term? Wings of awakening or limbs of enlightenment, or sometimes called the practices, 37 practices conducive to Bodhi. It's Bodhipasika Dharma. Bodhipasika Dharma. Pasika means parts. So Bodhi parts Dharma. And in the gradual school as opposed to direct school, okay, so the direct teaching says, just this mind is a Buddha. Why don't you awaken to it right now, directly? The gradual school uses things like this, takes you through stages. So if you're following the stages, you have what are called now 7 here, 7 Bodhi shares, which are part of the 37. Bodhyangani, if you want the Sanskrit. Bodhyangani, it means the 7 shares. What's the first one? And this goes right to your question. The first Bodhi share is mindfulness. And mindfulness means you remember, not hanging on to, but remember your distant past. Both in terms of, I made this resolve. Was it last week or last year? You remember, you go back. My teachers say, when you get lost, go back to that point when you made your resolve. Let that be your pole star. Return to that point. So mindfulness means you go back to that point when you first were inspired to come forth and whatnot, or you were first resolved to leave home, or whatever it was. That moment of inspiration, that's what you're mindful of. You're able to call that back. But you're also mindful of where you left the path. So mindfulness here is referring to your deep aspiration you go back to, but also mindful of how you left it, how you strayed. I'm going home. My fields and garden are choked with weeds. Why should I not return? Yesterday's wrongs I know very clearly. I'm not so far from the path that I forgot. This is Talian Ming's poem called The Return. Okay, he does in that poem reflect, I can remember, I know where I misstepped, and I'm not going to do it again. That's mindfulness. The next thing, the second Bodhi share, anybody know this one? You investigate the Dharma. So once you have this mindfulness, you know that you have to cement it with investigation of the Dharma. You can't just sit there, wake up every morning and say, I like the Dharma. What is it? I don't know. Or today it feels like it's far away. You gotta get into the Dharma, do the Dharma, read the Dharma, study the Dharma. So you investigate the Dharma and you keep at it. Every day you eat, sleep, wear your clothes, and every day you investigate the Dharma. You study it, you memorize it, you reflect upon it. If you don't do it, it'll drift away. I guarantee it. We are creatures of habit. We are adaptable for better or for worse. We become what we behold. We become what we eat. We become who we hang around with. As Menchia says, draw near the black, you turn black. Draw near the red, you turn rouge. Draw near the Dharma, you turn Dharma. Whoa, you look like Dharma. Well, I do it every day. So instead of saying, hey, you work out, who cares? You do Dharma? It looks like you do it. You walk into somebody who's got some light and some non-affliction, say, hey, you do Dharma? Oh yeah, every day. Cool. You know, you look like you do Dharma. So that's my t-shirt, do Dharma. Okay? You do it. This is the second. So not only you have mindfulness, but then you investigate and keep at. The third one, endeavor. The third share, endeavor. And that means you continue to study, to practice. You maintain this effort without flagging, without going back. This is what rituals and devotions are about with us. It's not like you do these and the bodhisattvas all feel happy and give you nice things. That's not what you're doing. You're doing it to maintain endeavor. Every day you do recitation, you do zalka, wanka, whatever you want to do. You do your mantras, you do your sitting. That's endeavor. You don't quit for one day. Then you're able to maintain. So to answer your question, what happens? First of all, you have this mindfulness. Then you start your practice of investigating the Dharma and holding to it. And then you stay with it, endeavor. And now you get to the fourth, which is joy. I want to stress this. This is joy. You be happy. Why you be happy? Because you're doing the other three. You are mindful. You're contemplating. You know which way to step. You're doing it every day. And the endeavor sustains, and now you get joy. You get a happiness that comes from doing the Dharma. That in itself is a kind of joy. So if you're doing this right, you should be happy. There should be a kind of, I don't mean like ecstatic, like the ecstasy drug where you're bouncing out the walls and giggling like a maniac, or you have nitrous oxide. I mean there's a kind of joy, like the sun, just it's there, it's just strong. And your joy is, I'm on the right path, I remember where I stepped off of it, and every day I'm investigating this, and the joy just grows. This is the fourth share, joy. Now, these are sequential. From that joy then comes tranquility, because you're on the right path. You know where the path leads, you're on the right path, you're doing it every day, you get the joy from doing it every day, right here and now. It's not like you endure the Dharma for this life, and then in the next life, you'll be born in the Pure Land. Okay? Suffer, suffer, suffer now. Do the Dharma. And then Amitabha will say, not bad, you really did. Hanshinku. You know, and so now you get the Pure Land. You don't have to wait. The Pure Land is a pure mind. The Pure Land are these first three. If you're mindful, if you're investigating, right? If you're endeavor, it comes immediately. I must say, Buddhists can be hedonist. You get it now. When do you want joy? What do you want joy? When do you want it? Now. That's how you get from this. So the equanimity or the tranquility that comes, let's say call it tranquility, means that you are daily in a Dharma joy. What's the thing at the chant at the mealtime? Dhyana bliss and Dharma joy. It's not talking about the food. It's talking about the sustenance you get every day from being in the Dharma. I tell you, there's nothing in the world that matches this. That's why when they call the long night of birth and death, when you lose the body, you lose your consciousness for a while, you're wandering. The darkness is, there's no Dharma. There's nothing of meaning and purpose. It's shallow, it's superficial. You're in a hell, just things pulling you this way and that way. There's no light, there's no joy, there's nothing profound or deep because you pulled out the plug for that connection. Once you find the Dharma again, wow, that's joy, that's the initial. And then what do? Well, you go back into the darkness again. No, you endeavor, you stay with it, you keep at it, you cultivate it. This is why it's called the limbs, or the stages or steps of enlightenment. And the sixth one then is samadhi. Now samadhi means from the above, you're not moving anymore. There's a contentment and a comfort. And they describe this as physical, emotional, and intellectual and spiritual. This comfort means you are in fact comfortable in all those levels because of the previous. And that is a samadhi, that's an evenness that doesn't come or go. And then finally it leads to the seventh share, which is equanimity. Yeah. And just to finish, the equanimity then means you understand the logic of this, why you'd have equanimity? Because now you're there, you're maintaining, there's a joy, there's a samadhi, and thus you can just go along and along, not being pulled by desires and attachments anymore, not being afraid. You don't waver. You're not inclined towards things and you're not pulled. You're not inclined towards and you're not pulled. Okay? This is the equanimity. These are called the seven Bodhi shares. Now you see why they make sense in terms of the text we just did? Why they would be in there. And those Bodhi shares give you a hint to the meaning of this passage. And they actually describe, give you an inner insight into where this passage is leading. When you get this, to go back to your question that you asked about the up and down, this is the conquest then. There's no more of that up and down. It's constant, because the up and down come from the wavering. And the wavering comes because there's not a steadiness of mindfulness. How did I get here? Why am I here? And maintaining it every day. Once you do that, then the wavering stops. And in a sense, it becomes second nature. So at a certain point, not only do you not retreat, you don't even have the impulse to retreat. Because the impulse to retreat would be just like biting your tongue. It would pain that much because now you're so in the vibe of this. There's so much joy that comes from this daily that pulling away from that, even for a moment, is such misery that you quickly go back. At the beginning, you're not clear. You know, at the beginning, you say, well, that was okay. That was cool. It was at the city, 10,000 Buddhists, 7 days. It was really cool. And then you're back in LA for 6 weeks. And all of a sudden you're going, hey, I think it's not so cool, but I can't remember where the cool was. You know, well, yeah, I was at the city. And then you go back and go back and go back and forth. But after a while, you start to figure it out, unless you're you start to figure it out and think, whoa, not only when I'm there when I'm doing it, but if I maintain this a little bit after I'm doing it, I actually maintain this joy and equanimity. And the more I maintain it, the deeper in the Dharma I go. The deeper in the Dharma I go, the more it feeds back, so it becomes a loop like this. And so depending on your roots and your karma and whatnot, all of us are going to experience that. I did, you did, or do. But at a certain point, if you take these limbs and sort of apply them, you will actually level out. And you'll get a momentum in the Dharma. It won't be whoop, whoop, but it'll be just gradually stronger and stronger and stronger. And you won't retreat from it because every step you made is holdable. It's not like you've done this great leap and you fall back. This is the steadiness of it. That's why this is that gradual, solidified approach that you do. Make sense? Okay. Questions?
Was the fifth Bodhi share tranquility?
Excuse me?
Was the fifth Bodhi share tranquility?
I can't hear you.
Was
The seventh?
What the fifth one was? Tranquility.
The sixth one was samadhi. Okay, so let's go through them again. First one, mindfulness. Second one, you investigate the Dharma. Now this means two things. You not only investigate the Dharma generally, but it also can mean you find your Dharma door and you stick to it. Whatever that is. Recitation, memorization, bowing, sitting. Enter one gate deep, when all connect. When one connects, they all connect. The third one is endeavor, vigor, if you will. Then comes the fourth one, joy. But see, this joy thing is really cool. Because if you're doing it right, you should be pretty happy. You cannot be going around like this. I cultivate. I'm a cultivator of the way. And you look miserable. You look like you should see a therapist. That means you don't get to this fourth one of joy. And it shouldn't be, hey, I cultivate Dharma, ha! No, that's the other side, okay? It should just be, hey, you're pretty content. You're pretty cool. You're pretty happy. You know? How does that come about? It comes from that joy. Joy is different than, delight or ecstasy. Joy is steady, okay? Then what's the fifth one? Then comes tranquility. From tranquility then comes samadhi, and from samadhi then comes the equanimity. Ping dong xin. Okay? These are very helpful. I mean, in a very practical way. You can take these as lists, but if you take them practically and think about them, almost always your question is, you let go of one of these. There was a lapse in mindfulness, and you forgot that initial entry point aspiration, or you're repeating mistakes that you forgot to say, look, I remember, I'm not going to do that again. In fact, when I get to this point, this is what precedes that mistake I made last time. So it could be something as simple, I'm starting to hang around with the wrong people again. When I hang around with the wrong people, pretty soon I make the next step and I go down here and I have regrets. So not having regrets doesn't mean you just keep making mistakes and say, oh, who cares? Not having regrets means you actually correct them. You don't dwell on them, you change them. So mindfulness means, oh, if I smoke this, I get into this state. I think I'm not going to smoke this. Duh. Okay, if I drink this, if I hang out with this person, okay, if I get this kind of attitude going, I know it leads to this. So that's mindfulness on the negative, but mindfulness of the positive is why I came in, what brought me to the Dharma, and so forth. So that mindfulness is the first step of the loss. And then the next one would be you're mindful, but you don't have a daily steady practice. And so even though you've made that, if you don't keep it up, it's just like if you don't eat every day, you get weaker and weaker. If you don't do it every day, it's not something like, I took refuge in the Triple Jewel. When? 20 years ago. And what have you done since then? Did you have to do something? I just took refuge and I was saved. No. Eat, sleep, wear clothes, liberate yourself. You do it every day, just in the same fashion. That's the teaching. So again, this endeavor, this staying with it, is the absolute key for not slipping and sliding. Okay? All right, ready for the Jataka? Okay, if I go over a little bit, will you all suffer? Huh? Okay, I love the Jatakas. I used to do this a long time ago with kids, and I'd never tell them the ending. And I'd say, so what do you think happens? And then they'd all raise their hands. And usually boys and girls. So as soon as the boy raised his hand, 2 girls' hands would go up. As soon as 2 girls' hands would go up, 4 boys' hands would go up because they wanted to beat each other at the answer. Okay, so I'm going to shorten this and abbreviate this. For those of you who follow the Jatakas, this one is called the Kudala Jataka. Okay? And so basically what this story is, the Buddha comes into the hall at the Jeta Grove, and in the hall, all the monks are talking. And they're talking about the story, but basically the story goes like this. When this person who's the figure of the story early on in the past, he'd been a youth of a good family. And one day on the way home from plowing the fields, he turned into the monastery. He walked into the monastery. And here, for some reason, one of the monks gave him a bowl of food. So it must have been one of those really good celebration days where they didn't have the ordering. They had dainty fare, it says rich and sweet. Maybe like Saturdays here. Dainty fare, rich and sweet, really good food. And he thought to himself, day and night I'm toiling away with my hands at all this work, yet I've never tasted such good and sweet food. What was his resolve? I'm going to be a monk. Yep. So he said to himself, I'm going to become a monk. So he joined the monkhood. He joined the Sangha. And after 6 weeks of really zealous applications and high thinking, it says he fell under the dominion of his lust and off he went. Okay? Here's the back and forth. So this is called hedonic adaptation. He adjusted to the sweet food and it wasn't so sweet after more than 6 weeks. And so his belly again, proving too much for him, back he came to the monkhood again. Okay, and once more he studied, practiced, and he did this 6 times. Back and forth, 6 times, until finally, on the 7th time, he said, I'm just going to stay here and do it. And he studied, and he became an arhat. Okay? Now, what he did exactly, I don't know. And the other monk said, look, 6 times back and forth, the lust overcame you again. How did you cause those lusts to cease? How did you do it this time? And he says, I've gotten beyond the worldly cravings. And I'm not going to retreat. And then he said, after he said that, then the Buddha came in and said, what are you talking about? And they said, well, we're talking about this guy who finally made it after 7 times. And he says, and he gave this description. He says, monks, the heart of a worldly person is light and hard to curb. Material things attract and hold it fast. When once it is so held fast, it is difficult to release. Difficulty, okay? He said, excellent for someone who has mastered such a heart. Once mastered, it brings joy and happiness. See the Bodhi thing? So that mastery, difficult to conquest, brings joy and mastery. And he says, then the verse was, 'tis good to tame a headstrong heart and frail, by passion swayed. Once trained, the heart brings bliss. Okay, so that's the background. Now the actual story. So the story goes, the Buddha says, by the way, you know how the Jataka format runs? This isn't the first time this happened. In a previous life, this monk had also, okay, so here's the previous one. We're going back now, flashback. It says, once upon a time, when the Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva came to life as a gardener and grew up. And what was his name? Spade Sage. Spade Sage. Shovel Sage. Spade Sage. That was his name. Okay, he grew up. And, well, that's because with his spade, he cleared a patch of ground and grew pot herbs and pumpkins and gourds and cucumbers and all kinds of vegetables, and by which the sale he made his living. So he was called Spade Sage. Actually, that was the only thing he really had in the world, was that one spade. Everything else he was poor in. So he decided one day to forsake the world for the religious spiritual life, and he hid a spade and became a monk. But thoughts of that spade soon grew in his heart. And the passion of greed overcame him, so that for the sake of his spade, he went and dug it up and went back to the world again. Again and again this happened. How many times, you guess? 6, right. 6 times did he hide a spade and then become a monk, only to renounce his vows and go back and dig up the spade and go back to work again. But the 7th time, he thought he knew that the blunt spade had caused him again and again to backslide. And so he made up his mind he was going to throw it into a river and then become a recluse. Okay? Now, the subtlety of this is wonderful. What do you think he's going to do? Just throw it into the river because he can't dig it up again, right? So he carried the spade to the riverside, and he was ready to throw it. And what did he do? He thought, if I throw it and see where it lands in the river, I might be inclined to come back and fish it out again. Really cool. So what does he do? He whirls it around 3 times with his eyes closed, and then just lets go of it. And it says, with the strength of an elephant, right into the midstream, shutting his eyes tightly as he did this. So he did, and he kaplunk, and he doesn't know where it is. Then, as soon as it hit the water like that, a loud rang out his shout of exultation, a shout like it's a lion's roar. He shouted out, and what did he say is, I conquered! I conquered! I mean, really loud. Now, you don't see this every day. I mean, I see people out working in the garden here and whatnot, and if I saw you working in the garden and suddenly you just throw the spade, And you go, I conquered! I conquered! Nobody knew what you were doing, right? Now, just at that moment, as it happened, the king of Benares was on his way home from quelling a disorder on the border. And he had been bathing in that very river. Right. And was riding along on his elephant in all his splendor on the back of the elephant. And he bathed himself and he was feeling really good because he quelled a major disorder, a rebellion. And then he hears this maniac and he says, he conquered. He says, who is that proclaiming that he conquered? I wonder what he has conquered. Go bring him to me. Okay? So the Bodhisattva was brought before the king, who said to him, my good man, I am a conqueror. You are not a conqueror. I just won a battle, and I'm on my way home victorious with all my troops. Tell me, what have you conquered? Not bad, huh? And the Bodhisattva said without a flinch, he says, 1,000, yeah, 100,000 such victories as yours are empty and vain, if you've not had a victory over your passions and lust within yourself. It is by conquering greed within myself that I have conquered my lust today. And as he spoke, he gazed upon the great river. And as he gazed upon the river after this, it said he reached a state of purity and calm and actually attained arhatship right on the spot. And the king, according to the story, as he listened to this, and he saw the light and the joy from this arhat who had just done this, it hit his own darkness, it said, and his own lust in his heart were quenched. And he then resolved to leave the world and become a monk. Now, it could go on because, although, and this is where I'm going to leave you with the story, but the next part is all the people in the kingdom finally find out they don't have a king anymore because he followed the spade sage off. But this is the famous story of the spade sage. And I thought it's a wonderful Jataka, but I thought I'd use it as an example because I think it ties really well in with the text tonight. And so whatever it is, close your eyes, whip it around 3 times, and throw it in the river. And then say, I have conquered, I have conquered. Okay, sorry I went a little over tonight. Who's ever going to lecture? Who's up next week, or do you? Somebody will. Okay, so we'll continue the passage next week. And please give my apologies to people who have worked hard on the mindset translation. I didn't mean to disparage it. I just wanted to point out that our translations are a work in progress, and they can get better. And sometimes what seems like a good translation often solves one problem, but then opens a door for other kinds of problems. So anyhow, enough. No more questions? Any announcements? Here or at the city? Okay. So are you all going up to the city and therefore there'll be nobody here?
Me and Jing Husher and myself will be going up to CDDB tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll be helping with the English portion of the Earth Store session. So we'll have an English recitation as well as some evening talks around the Earth Store Sutras themes. And so that will be at night. And so if people are interested, they can go up for the Earth Store session if they want like some English. The Chinese recitation is going on as normal.
And then here,
basically next week, we don't have anything going on throughout the week, just a normal schedule. I mean, we will have classes like usual. We'll have the meditation as usual. So for instance, Marty's class is starting this Friday up again.
right.
Is there another class starting? I think Roundtable probably canceled. I don't think Roundtable will be happening this Thursday. So if people are planning to come for Roundtable, I think it's not going to happen this Thursday. And then Wednesday, I don't think.
And the monk in residence has a vow of silence.
Yes, the Daching Fasher is still maintaining his vow of silence. So I think most of the activities will not be occurring. If you look at the schedule on the board, it tells you when this classes will start. Yeah. So next Saturday, we're going to have the same thing we did today, which is that we'll have a Dharma assembly in the morning, reciting the Lotus Sutra. And then what we'll do is we'll actually not have lunch because the people who usually do the lunch offering are still in Canada. So people can just join the Dharma assembly in the morning and then maybe find a place for lunch and come back for meditation at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we will also have lecture as normal on Saturday next week. Also, the Buddha recitation tomorrow is canceled. So the all-day Buddha recitation.
Because you're going up to the city.
Yeah, people are going to the CDB. Am I missing anything?
So the class, the Friday night class, will continue the same format as last year. We're going to continue with Han Chan's Wandering in a Dream as a text, and then city meditation. And nothing to eat. Okay, let's... The book? Oh, the Jataka stories? These are called the Jataka tales. They go by, these are basically the Jataka, it's called the Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's former lives. And this is a translation that was done in England. So it's kind of high Victorian. I have to modify the language. But it's the most comprehensive. There's variations of this that have been modified and edited down, and some for children. They're quite good. But this is the original full content, and then you just have to work with that funny Victorian English to render it down. But it has the causes and conditions of the story, what the previous was, and often at the end they say, and now in that past life, the monkey was so-and-so, the donkey was such and such, and I was such and such. And so it's meant to be a story of the Buddha's previous lives on the way to cultivation when he was assuming all different kinds of forms and shapes. But these are probably the most memorable way of teaching, and they're still used. When I was in Burma, one of the highlights was at the evening. This was sort of pre-modern Burma. Well, still, the elder monk or whatnot would come out around a fire in the village and then tell a Jataka story. And everybody would gather, young and old would be gathered there, and he just used this wonderful lyric Burmese language in the hands and illustrating, and all the kids and adults were listening to the story. And the story goes in. It's a really good mnemonic device for getting principles. So I like the Jatakas, and whenever I do, I try to share one or two. Well, I found that if you search around, you'll be able to, these are one of 3 volumes I have. These are still available, but very hard to find. You can order them, though. If you want to, just email me, and I've done a little bit of search, and there's some versions that are better than others. Yeah, you can enact them. This is great with kids. You just have a little play, and you play out the Jatakas. Yeah. Which one? Berkeley Public Library. Wow. Everybody know what that is? A library is a place where they have books, and you go in and you can actually take the books home. What's a book? Okay. Okay, good. Let's do the transfer.
May every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may their minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow lead their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Please stand.